Kate, when I learned that your topic had issues associated with the climate catastrophe around it, I was keen for you to come along and talk to us together with Mike. The floor is yours. You might need to keep the microphone fairly close. Thank you, Kate.
Hello everyone, thank you for having me here. I'm coming just to talk about reports. I'm going to show you government reports, maybe you're aware of them or maybe you're not, I don't know, on managed retreat and uninsurable houses and different climate, United Nations climate pact for the future, talk about creating a planetary climate emergency and different things that are involved in that. So I'm just going to really take you through government documents and think tanks and what they're saying, like the Committee for Sydney, which is in Sydney, and some of the different players that are involved. And basically I'm very concerned about where this is heading and the centralised corporate level of control this is ushering in. But I'd like to just leave it with, you know, in one way, I'm new to the climate change agenda. I assumed climate change meant caring for the environment. In the last few years, I've become very aware that's not the case. And I started to look at then mitigation strategies, which completely alarm me, including synthetic food, some, you know, just absolute corporatized control of our food sources, talking about spraying things into the sky to reflect the sunshine back, just incredibly damaging, concerning things. So that's pretty much where I've come from, where I had an assumption it was about something, but I hadn't educated myself. And it's actually quite a tricky thing to start to try to unpack. And I've been looking at a lot of different things. So when I see the amount of control the government is now getting through has already got through legislation, and the corporations that are involved and the think tanks that are sitting in Sydney talking about moving people off properties because of climate change modelling, I'm very concerned. So I just want to take you through what they're saying. There'll be a lot more that I haven't found at this point in time. So this is what I'm going to talk about. So this is the climate change. This is the Climate Council of Australia and their report. It came out a few years ago. Uninsurable Nation, Australia's most climate vulnerable places. So the Climate Council produced a ranking of the top 10 most at-risk electorates from climate change and extreme weather events. Based on so it's saying that if you go into the high-risk category, it's because you have projected, so it's only projected annual damage costs equivalent to 1% or more of the property replacement cost. So they've costed a normal house at like $320,000. So that means if they project that you would need $3,200 worth of repairs for your house due to climate change, which is really broad, you would be in the high risk and uninsurable category, according to their parameters. And so that 1 in 25 houses are going to be uninsurable by 2030. And then you get into the medium risk, which means that you're not shored enough, which to me sounds like you need to have your insurance brought up and made more expensive. That means your projected cost to replace your property would be 0.2% to 1%. So if you're 0.2% of a $320,000 house, I think it's like $600 a year of projected costs for climate change modelling. So this report came out a couple of years ago, and so the models they use, they're using all different models and they're compounding them. So they're using a model, because I'm sure you know there's a lot of different, you know more than me about this, there's a huge amount of different climate change models. So what they get is the worst climate change model for flooding for this area, and then they say, okay, this is your risk from climate change based off that model. Then they get another model that's the worst fire conditions that could happen. And then they say this is for your area, so they then bring out your fire risk for that area from that model. Does that make sense? And then they compound all of those together to give you a score. So they're not even using one model. So they're going to say you've got your grave risk of flooding, but you've got no risk of fire. So they just use the most extreme ones and then compound them. And they're saying in here, uninsurable properties, 6.5% in Queensland, 3.3% in New South Wales by 2030. But insurance will become increasingly unaffordable or unavailable in large parts of Australia. So this is the modelling that they're going to use. It's through it's through climate valuation, XDI, and this is the same one the New South Wales government uses as well. I don't understand at this point in time the maximum to date value at risk, what that means, but they're using some maximum to date value at risk of extreme weather and climate rated hazards. And they use data from local meteorological stations with information about specific locations such as flood mapping and depths, elevation above sea level, tides and waves, soil type and forest cover, and data on the assumed building at that address. And then they also use climate change modelling from agencies such as the CSIRO, the University of New South Wales, University of Queensland, and the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. But that's just such as, so they're using, I don't know exactly what models they're using. And then they tell you that models that predict a wetter future are used to assess flood risks, models that predict a drier future are used to assess drought risks, etc. So it's a lot of cherry picking of the worst case scenario for each model being used in actually people's insurance. So I'll go on to the next one. I just want to say with the CSIRO, Larry Marshall was the CEO of the CSIRO until I think last year or the year before. He at some point fired a lot of the scientists that were working on climate change and said there's no need to do any more modelling, the science is settled. So I think that's really important when they're using CSIRO models to know that at some point it was stopped about the modelling. He's a venture capitalist and he's got a venture capital firm called Blackbird, which is invested in probably a lot of things, but they're invested in synthetic meat, which is so they're interested in mitigating climate change, and one of the ways of mitigating climate change is that we have to eat synthetic food. So that's Larry Marshall, but if you go to the next one, that's his partner Bill Barty of Blackbird. So this is this venture capital firm, and Bill Barty has a partnership with the CSIRO. They've got the venture capital CSIRO main sequence, so they fund a lot of the climate mitigation, fake meat, synthetic food, and other things. Okay, so we're still with the Climate Council report. Support communities to build back better. So this is when we get into this managed retreat idea. And build back better, if you've been aware, has been said by every politician around the world in the last few years. We need to build back better after COVID. So towns, cities and communities must be rebuilt where appropriate to do so in a way that takes into account the inevitable future changes in climates and makes them more resilient. In some very high risk locations, this may mean not rebuilding at all. Managed relocations must be discussed as an option for some of the most vulnerable. Okay, so this is where they're saying the 10 most at risk federal electorates by 2030 are in Australia. So for New South Wales, it's Richmond, and it is Page, so it's Northern New South Wales. So they're both the two Northern New South Wales electorates. So you can see there, in these 10 electorates alone, 15% of properties, or around 1 in 7 properties, will be uninsurable within 10 years. And this is just a Wikipedia definition of managed retreat. Managed retreat involves the purposeful, coordinated movement of people and buildings away from risks. This may involve the movement of a person, infrastructure or community. So infrastructure is really important to also note, because a lot of the plans do talk about the private corporations that now have our infrastructure can decide whether or not they're going to keep servicing towns, as well as from state down to local can actually sort of direct whether or not to keep servicing towns or streets. This is the BBC article, so they're making this, there's this massive, I'm sure you're aware, there's this massive thing that we no longer should have nation states and some sense of nationality to our own countries, that we are just a global citizen in a global world. And so they make this case, up to 3 billion people expected to be displaced by the effects of global warming by the end of the century, and that instead of having some sort of patriotism to being Australian or whatever country you're from, instead you have patriotism to the environment in some way. So you no longer have that sense of, so the new patriotic narrative could be about civic nationalism based on the common good, with rights and duties, so rights and duties, and a passionate cultural attachment to nature. So there's this very nefarious sort of shift, not that I very much care about nature, but this is something different. This is a different way that everyone's a global citizen that just needs to care about nature and no longer about your country or your town or your neighbourhood or your family in particular. Okay, so there you'll notice, I'll get onto the government plan that came out at the end of February, but since the government plan that came out at the end of February, Disaster Mitigation New South Wales, which talks about managed retreat, we're seeing more and more stuff coming through the ABC since then. So Australians fear climate disasters. So 1 in 3 Australians are worried extreme weather will force them to permanently leave their homes. So we're starting to see the strip feeding of, many more people are concerned about this than I think actually are. Rising insurance premiums to the point of unaffordability were a big concern. And what's next? Community resilience experts say people need practical solutions to deal with these escalating disasters. So there's more and more workshops coming out in towns now about resilience and a resilient community. And this is another one recently. Insurance industry urged government to step in on flood zones. Skyrocketing insurance premiums were one of the biggest contributors to inflation over the past 12 months. So that's showing how the insurance has risen. So that's 2024, and the first one is 2014. And so it's risen 16% since 2014-ish. Yeah. Okay, so they're going to invest in data to understand climate risk and how we prepare for it. So they need a robust national hazard database that streamlines existing national, state and territory data sets, etc. So yeah, and just I don't understand the climate modelling. I think we need to really get involved with unpacking the modelling and which ones are being used by government. So I think that's going to be really essential. But this is one of the collaborations between the BOM and the CSIRO, Collaboration for Australian Weather and Climate Research. And partly what they're also doing, the Australian government has funded, I think it's Suncor, to come in. So now there's these free bushfire resilience rating apps to protect homes. So people this is going to happen more and more in the insurance realm. So you have an app on your phone, you've got to cross and put in information about your home, and then they'll say you need to go and do this and that, and then you tick off on it in some way, and then your insurance will go down a little bit. So this is the sort of kind of carrot aspect to the stick that will come. And they talk about they want to see an expansion of this sort of resilience rating scheme across the nation, not just for bushfire, but also threats like flooding and cyclones. So they're getting all the information about your home. And it does talk about the resilience ratings can help transform Australia's risk into resilience rapidly. Every action a household takes, big or small, helps make our communities stronger, safer and insurable. So they're linking the individual person with their home to the whole community and the common good of the community. Okay, look, this is just something I put in here. I don't know yet. Somebody said to me the other day, a couple of years ago, they were giving out, Australian government, the federal government, I think it was giving out $1,000 and $400 per child for anyone that was flood affected in these LGAs. And you didn't have, and I remember it, you didn't have to do anything. You just had to say you were flood affected. So plenty of people were just saying they were flood affected and getting reimbursement. And today I'm just like, they're probably going to use that amount of money to actually justify how much money they're having to spend on climate change things to be used, because it was very unusual at the time. It was like anyone could get it. You didn't have to show any proof of any flood damage. Okay, so this plan came out at the end of February, State Disaster Mitigation Plan, New South Wales. So they're talking about a multi-hazard, so all the different hazards they bring together. Technical risk assessment was completed, so it was multi-hazard, and it's based on the average annual loss. This is defined as the expected or average cost of damage to property and in infrastructure arising from all occurrences or probabilities of that hazard in any one year. So we're going into the probability, the possibility. You know, you'll see more and more of these terms. It's not actually what's just happened in the area, it's what will happen based on climate, or what they might happen based on climate change modelling. They talk about two of the key drivers: increasing exposure and vulnerability over time to the population are population growth and climate change. On the Central Coast, it's getting, you know, more and more of the natural environment is getting, you know, it's getting more and more built up. Around Sydney's getting more and more built up, and more people are coming in. So they talk about that there. So they're going to, at the middle of next year, they're going to bring out a policy for large-scale multi-hazard managed retreat through New South Wales. So moving people off properties, moving the infrastructure away from different towns by the middle of next year. Can you take it back, please? And they talk about funding principles between governments, councils, households and businesses. So we're going to potentially, you know, they haven't spelled it out yet, but there'll be, it looks like there's going to be like a lot of disaster infrastructure needing to be put into place, which will be funded by the people. New Zealand's already ahead of us. They've got Capity in New Zealand. They're already talking about how people are going to be reimbursed their properties, and it goes from things like if you've got a second property, you won't get any money at all. The government might help you actually demolish it, so you might get a bit of help with the cost of demolishing the second house. So they're talking about that. I can't remember exactly what else, but Capity, if you want to look that up, there's a couple of groups already fighting back in Capity against the climate change modelling. They've put certificates on people's houses where it says it's not, you know, climate, a really big risk of climate change, and the people that have those certificates on their houses aren't even aware, or they weren't a few months ago. So the other thing I want to just point out here, it says implementation. So once they've taken you off the land, they talk about nature-based mitigation, and I will come to that because they talk about this all the time: nature-based mitigation, ecosystem services. Okay, so they want to explore options for innovative funding pathways and cost sharing, develop funding principles to guide cost sharing for disaster risk reduction between the Australian state and local governments and private asset owners. So that's people having to pay more, and a lot of people are already starting to really struggle. So you've got, you know, the mortgage payments going up, land taxes going up, insurance is going up, and then there's going to be extra on top for this sort of disaster mitigation in communities. That's not talking about managed retreat. And what else is important here? So again, it's just talking about the nature-based measures, which I will come to. And this is, for such a big thing for New South Wales disaster mitigation, large-scale managed retreat for the whole of New South Wales, they consulted with 35 community members on 2 online workshops. Because it's really, really important. So with government and community having a shared responsibility in reducing and adapting to natural hazard risk, it was so important to have community knowledge. So we got 35 people to know about this with 2 online workshops.
35 hand-picked people.
Yeah. They're using the multi-hazard risk assessment, climate change. They're using the high results are presented for a 2060 high emission scenario. So this Capity's pushing back on this, with them using a high emission scenario. This is the New South Wales government. So these are the LGAs, local government areas that most at risk. Central Coast comes number 1. So they look at storm, flood, bushfire, earthquake, cyclone, coastal inundation, coastal erosion, and then give you a figure. And Central Coast is number 1. I don't know what's the closest here. Is it you've got Northern Beaches, Blacktown, Canterbury Bankstown, but yeah, Central Coast is by way the highest in there. Okay, so it's managed relocation is defined as the permanent and purposeful movement of people in existing homes and infrastructure exposed to existing or anticipated effects of natural hazards. And they talk here about community relocation, not only removing the people from the area of risk, but subsequently resettling these people in alternative locations. These programs aim to move a number of people and keep these people together in their community. So that's sounding very much like you're going to be moved into somewhere specific. if you're going to move people all together into a community, a community together. Yeah, and they talk here about, like you can't see the bottom one, it's cut off on this screen, but fully compulsory purchase or fully compulsory scheme is the bottom. So they talk about voluntary schemes where you can just, because some houses are built on the wrong places and they do flood, and the people would be quite happy to be bought out of them. But they're not talking about just this here. This isn't just stopping at those houses that are built really inappropriately in certain areas where they should never have been built. They're talking about climate modelling for what might happen in the future. So it goes all the way down to fully compulsory. I can't read what it says, but fully compulsory. They can just take you off your land no matter if you don't want to be. Okay, I'll go to the next page. So again, nature-based mitigation measures. I'll talk about that again a bit later. And ecosystem services. So they want to value nature. So they want to really break down the nature into. It gives you this much fresh air. Seriously, it gives this much. Yeah, this is ecosystem services. You value nature based on the service nature gives you. So it's commodifying, putting a price on nature. I don't know if, so it's putting a price point on nature it gives you this much fresh air, it allows this much pollination, it does this much carbon sequestering the carbon, etc. So that's ecosystem services all through the government documents. This is the Act. This all sits under the Managed Retreat, and the New South Wales Reconstruction Authority Act was passed in 2022. So it just talks about how they can tell local council to take certain actions in the exercise of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, and in exercising its functions. So they created this Reconstruction Authority. The authority may work in cooperation with other government agencies and other persons and bodies that the authority thinks appropriate, whether or not the agencies, persons and bodies are in or of the state. So they don't even have to be Australian corporations that can be working with them. And they have the power to acquire land. So it can be for disaster prevention, which means the disaster hasn't happened there yet. They can acquire your land by agreement or by compulsory process, and they then can sell, lease, exchange, or otherwise get rid of your land. So they've got the powers to do that. Now there'd be many different players behind this, but one of them is the committee, or one of them that's involved is the Committee for Sydney. This is the city's urban policy think tank. They talk about convening policy research and advocating to government. And they had this report, I can't remember what year it was, I think it was 2021, on a 2023, Defending Sydney, Adapting Planning for Today's Flooding and Tomorrow's Climate Risks. And you can see there's ACOM, which is a Canadian infrastructure company. IAG is like the big conglomerate of insurance companies. Resilient Sydney is a Rockefeller initiative, and I'll talk about them in a minute. So they put this plan out. So it's good to see what they're saying as well, because they're very similar, the state government's plan and this plan. So I don't know, do you know that we are part of the 6 Cities region? You haven't heard about that? Passed through state government a couple of years ago. 6 Cities region, from above Newcastle, out through the Hawkesbury area, down through Central Coast, through Sydney, down to Wollongong, and then out all the way to the Blue Mountains through Western Sydney. So 6 Cities region, we're all part of. So they're talking about this back here, embed in the 6 Cities region plan a high, medium and low climate risk overlay. So over every, I don't know if that's your region or to come to your town, you've got your climate risk rating within the regional plan. So ours was Central Coast was meant to come out this year. Oh, just if you can just go back a bit. So this is this quote. Globally, there's an emerging roadmap for generating community. They have to make the community accept that it's okay to lose your home and to be sort of moved somewhere. So there's an emerging roadmap for generating community acceptance of planned relocation as part of building a city's climate resilience. The limited experience of cities that have taken on planned relocations suggests that an effective process depends on critical actions that move the community from denial and anger to acceptance. It's especially important to reframe relocation as not simply a loss of what was, but as a part of a larger and inspiring vision for what can be for the city's future.
sounds like German, doesn't it?
Okay, so this is again is the city of the Committee for Sydney. They want mandatory climate risk assessments to inform local government flood risk assessments, update quarterly rates notifications to include all hazard exposure, update the S.107, that's your housing certificate, to include all hazard exposure and how global warming is expected to change or exacerbate these hazards. So here we're starting, and this is what they've done in Kapiti in New Zealand without informing the people that they've done it to. So this is where we see that it might become very difficult to sell your house. And enable IPART to accelerate climate adaptation. So they set our council rates and other infrastructure. So I can see that council rates will start having to absorb these costs. We'll have to start paying more for these measures. And we've got the Build Back Better again. So when they talk about they'll talk about resilient housing, it's all about smart technology, and they've got nature-based solutions. So we get into the smart city idea where everything is kind of hooked up to the internet of things, everything's being tracked with data, which has got massive implications for our privacy. Plus, we're living in a very different way than we have before. I'll talk a bit more about that. So, Matt, can you just go back a bit? So again, this is this sort of idea, individualised approaches to relocation, move people out of high-risk areas. This reduces social capital and cohesion of those left behind, those who leave and those who are left behind. It's more collective to move people together and move people at the same time. So it's not necessarily a couple of houses here and there, it's potentially streets or towns, who knows? Okay, so this is, you saw that Resilient Sydney was part of the creating that Committee for Sydney's plan and Resilient Cities Network. You just need to know the Resilient Cities Network is part of the 100 Resilient Cities, and that was an initiative by the Rockefeller Foundation. So that started in 2013 and came into Sydney in 2015. So now they're putting out a lot of the plans around resilience for Sydney and wider. So it's a collaboration of 33 metropolitan councils to develop and implement a citywide resilience strategy, first published in 2018. And you'll see it's all about digital innovation. Digitalisation is key to accelerating the green transition. Everything's got to go on the internet, everything's got to be tracked and traced. We have to have smart technology on everything that's feeding our data back out. So, not very long, I think Biden's just basically said, what's the, like your kettle and your fridge and everything's going to have to be smart, because then they can actually, read how much you're using of things.
How many cups of tea?
Yeah, and also then they can change your electricity down. So New Zealand had something this morning where it was the coldest day this year in New Zealand and there wasn't enough electricity, so people were asked to turn off electricity in different places and make their house a bit colder, like not have the heating up as high. So that you wouldn't have to be asked, it would just happen externally where everything is taken down. This is resilience. So while Rockefeller's, infiltrating the world on resilient infrastructure and what everyone needs to do around the world, this is their definition of resilience. Resilience has helped to bridge the gap between disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. It moves away from traditional disaster risk management, which is founded on risk assessments that relate to specific hazards. Instead, it accepts the possibility that a wide range of disruptive events, both stresses and shocks, may occur, but are not necessarily predictable. So it focuses on enhancing the performance of a system in the face of multiple hazards. This disaster, mitigation, like warning systems and etc. So it's about just making everything more resilient rather than trying to prevent or mitigate the loss of assets. So this is it. You just need to see how many times it's possible, not necessarily predictable. It's an open slather. It's basically an open book to what may or may not happen. That's a really good book. I haven't read it yet, but I've watched this Jacob Nord, I don't know how to say his name, he's a professor. And he's got lots of videos on YouTube. So if you want to see how Rockefeller has been completely through the climate change, crafting of the climate change narrative, and all their conferences in the United Nations, he really does a good job of documenting that. Okay, so how much time have I got now? Where am I up to?
Can you get back to that other slide so I can
Yeah.
No, you're good. You're good.
Am I?
Yeah. It's only 12 minutes to wait. We've got an hour and
Okay,
10.
all right.
We've got an hour and 10. Well, there's some probably questions in there as well.
Yeah, so this is so this all comes under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 11 is make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable. So this is all this smart city. Part of the fourth industrial revolution, brought out by the World Economic Forum, the 1,000 largest corporate entities in the world. And this is all just about merging technology and biology. So we are seamlessly integrated with technology. So this is what's going to save us in the world is, and it says, and it'll change even what it means to be human. So the World Economic Forum and the United Nations have a strategic partnership, to bring in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the 1,000 largest corporate entities, and the United Nations signed a partnership in 2019. These are just the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but I mean, you may really be aware, but everything will come, if you look at councils or state government, everything comes under, they just justify everything under these goals, which on the surface all sound good, but when you start to have a look at them, very alarming things come up, including who's partnering with for a lot of these goals, the partnerships that are involved. Okay, so back to the Greater Cities Commission and the Committee for Sydney. So as I said, we're part of the 6 cities region. The Committee for Sydney brought out the Sandstone Mega Region. That was in 2018, uniting Newcastle, the Central Coast, Sydney, Wollongong. State government brought out pretty much the same plan 4 years later, called the 6 Cities Region. And so I just wanted to point this out, because we're in a very global arena. It's got nothing to do with Australia per se. We're in a global arena with all of this. So with their Sandstone Mega Region report, they thanked Greg Clark. So they say it's all locals. We made a task force made up of representative key organisations across Sydney, the Illawarra. They're not. They're global bodies. It's not. They're not. Greg Clark is the CEO of the Business of Cities on Global Mega Regions, and they have a partnership with the World Economic Forum. The Resilient Cities has a partnership with the World Economic Forum, which is the Rockefeller Initiative in Resilient Sydney. The Greater Cities Commission was dissolved on the 1st of January 2024, with its strategic planning functions moved to the new Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure. So they took away the Act, but it just reads to me like all the functions have just been dissolved into this big state body. And I've written to the Minister like 2 months ago to find out a few very simple things, and I'm still waiting for an answer as to what that looks like. So we're still in it. So the 6 mega city was that we're all part of a mega global city. Mega global city, that's what they said. So Parramatta is known for IT. Central Coast is going to be the food ag tech region. I don't know what this area was going to be for. Every area would have a couple of functions that made it specific and would attract global investors into the area. So that was all through their government plans.
Global investors.
Yeah, global investors. We had Amazon move into West Gosford. So because they've got their drone technology, they will have their drone technology, and we will be ending up having not really going out so much, but having drones deliver food to your home, groceries to your home. So with the World Economic Forum again, so you've got Scott Morrison standing, I think he's standing in here. This is, there he, I can't even see it with this map. So established in June 2019, G20 Global Smart Cities Alliance. So we've got the Global Smart Cities Alliance, which is headed up by the World Economic Forum that Australia is part of. And it's very much about the internet of and for things. So 1 trillion sensors connected to the internet. This is from the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum. By 2025, they were thinking, most people think, you know, in this sector, the 1 trillion sensors connected to the internet. They're looking, a recent study looked into how sensors can be used to monitor animal health and behaviour, but it's also human health. You know, they talk a lot about implanting tech into people's bodies to pick up on, you know, certain conditions within the body, or if you've got a virus and it'll send out an alert. Experts suggest that in the future every physical product could be connected to a communication infrastructure, and sensors everywhere will allow people to fully perceive their environment. So we're looking at a very different world, one where you're perceiving your environment through technology rather than experiencing it. And then of course all of that's run through AI, so it's all just a system that's in place. Smart living, smart environment, smart healthcare, smart education, smart governance, everything on the internet, everything accessible on the internet, run through AI, no longer human connections, through the metaverse. And this is the most bizarre thing about it. I put up a post today about, you know, we're now, Australia is seen as the critical mineral superpower of the world. That's what Australia is angling towards, and having, you know, huge amounts of mining for critical minerals. We've got more oil being mined. We've got more oil now. The coal mines are still opening up. They're putting all the renewables, you know, in the batteries and the transmission lines. So I don't think anything's going away. I think they're adding an overlay and more overlay of electricity, and whether or not it's because, in part of the reason, I think it's only part of the reason, is because you need a huge amount of energy to put everyone and everything connected to the internet and being tracked and traced, and the data being used, and the so this is saying the cloud computing's coming in energy crisis. The cloud's electricity needs are growing unsustainably. It's talking here about as much as 8% of all electricity to power the future cloud. So I think what's going to happen is all of this overseeing system that's put in place is going to use all the energy, and just we're going to be monitoring everything we use, but that's going to be using the vast majority of energy. Okay, so this is, okay, so I was talking about the ecosystem services and putting a price on the service nature gives you. So the amount of clean air, the amount of fresh air it gives you. Rockefeller and the International, International Bank of International
Settlements.
No, sorry, I'm thinking of something wrong. International Bank or something. I can't remember their name. It's not it exactly. They tried at the end of last year to make a new asset class on the stock market, and it's called ecosystems, natural asset companies. So they tried to get these natural asset companies as a new asset class where they could trade in ecosystem services. And what this means is, if you can just go, so NACs will be corporations that hold the rights to the ecological performance produced by natural or working areas such as national reserves or large-scale farmlands, and they have the authority to manage the areas for conservation, restoration or sustainable management, which can basically mean, who knows, it could mean mining for critical minerals, you know, with the way that they talk about things. So they're expected to license these rights from sovereign nations or private landholders. So what this means is, the way I read this, and this is examples of ecosystem services include clean air, water supply, flood protection, productive soils, climate stability, habitat for wildlife. So they get the rights to nature that gives you fresh air. Like, it's bizarre, it's very hard to understand, but you know, are you going to get taxed on being able to breathe clean air? And they actually, even though it's a different style of ownership, it's like a tokenization, but they actually they have the authority over that land. So our national parks, our state forests, the indigenous, you know, 72% of Australia will be owned by Aboriginal corporations by 2030. This is the back door where corporations can come through and start to own everything. But anyway, it didn't go through at this point. But when I look at it, didn't go through at the end of last year, but it's Rockefeller, it's not going to go away. Plus, when I look at the government documents, they talk about ecosystem services all the time. So it's like, why are they using that language? Where could this head? Could this head there in a different sort of, you know, slightly tweaked way? It's something that we have to keep our eye on. Okay. I am actually getting close to finishing. So this is just a couple of examples of how much the public-private partnership, The model that's come in is that private corporations should pay for things, get more and more ownership and get more and more rebates and more and more corporate ownership of the world. And this is the United Nations Global Compact and the United Nations. So this is just where the United Nations and private corporations is global. So it's today's development landscape features an inspiring array of new actors, powerful domestic forces spanning all levels of, so it's government, civil society, academia, scientific community and the private sector. So they're all working together, from micro enterprises to multinationals. They're all coming together for the common good. But we all understand, I think, what this power dynamic actually really is. And so this is under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 17. That it's all out in the open now. Corporations are going to save us the world. The Rockefellers got the Global Economic Recovery Team, so they're working all around the world so all those obsolete rules and legislation and procedures need to be done away with, because we need these new innovative ways to finance things and you know, basically rule the world. This is the Treasurer's Investment Roundtable, so you can see BlackRock and some other you can see Blackbird on there, the ex-CSIRO CEOs on there. You can see, you know, the banks, etc., sitting on the Treasurer's Investors Roundtable. And this is just another example, World Economic Forums, convening public-private and philanthropic partnerships for climate and nature. So there's so many. Once you start looking, there are so many collaborations that are formed, from global down to actually just sitting in your local towns with people who I don't think know what they're actually supporting. We've got the sustainable finance strategy with the green bonds that the government's going to be releasing. And I just wanted to finish with this. So this is our common agenda by the United Nations. I think that came out in 2021 or 2022. So this is our common agenda, is an agenda of action designed to accelerate the implementation of agreements, including the Sustainable Development Goals. Now is the time to re-embrace global solidarity and find new ways to work together for the common good. And it must include urgent and bold steps to address the triple crisis of climate disruption, biodiversity loss, and pollution destroying our planet. So they're putting everything together in a One Health model. So it's our physical, it's everything. It's biosecurity threats of basically everything: animals, plants, human beings, climate change, all comes together, and it can be controlled under this disaster resilience framework. That's where, you know, yeah, anyway, I won't get into it. But so this is just the one thing. I suggest you read it, because it's the start of a whole nother bunch of a bunch of agreements our government's embarking on. Where is it? They want to rebuild the world and have this new global consensus of what our future should look like. But it's here, declarations of climate emergency. So Biden, I saw something, I don't know when he was saying it, the last few days, probably saying he's going to call for a climate emergency in America. Okay. They're going to go, I think it's the 25th to the 27th or 26th, 28th. The leaders of the world, Anthony Albanese, etc., is going to go over, or whoever he sends over, to sign a pact for the future in September. And I suggest you read that. It's got a huge amount in there about giving more money to the UN and for financing. So I just pulled out a couple of things I thought might interest you or concern you. So this is the framing. We're at a moment of acute global peril. People are suffering effects of poverty, hunger, inequality, armed conflicts, violence, displacement, terrorism, climate change, disease, and the adverse impacts of technology. Humanity faces a range of potentially catastrophic and existential risks. We're also at a moment of opportunity. So they want strong and sustained international cooperation. They need a multilateral system that's fit for the future, ready to address political, economic, environmental and technological changes, and with the agility to adapt to an uncertain future, which means things can just be changed all the time. And they want to, I don't know exactly what this is about, but I think it's going to be very worth having a look. We know that multilateral institutions, especially the Security Council, the UN Security Council, and the international financial architecture have struggled to address the scale of the challenges they face. And so they're going to be looking at rejigging this a bit. So the UN's going to get rejigged a bit, and I'm not quite sure into what. But they talk a lot in this about having stronger international laws. So whether or not more and more laws just become under this international law and less around countries' laws, I would imagine that. They are, we reaffirm our commitment to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and to leave no one behind. And leaving no one behind has become more and more foreboding. The more, more menacing. The more I've heard that and read that. And then again, a surge in financing for the Sustainable Development Goals, sustainable financing, and environmental crises pose the most pressing and serious threats to the sustainability of our planet and the well-being of its present and future inhabitants, and have, blah, blah, blah. So it's just, again, with the environmental crises. And this is where, we commit to reforming of the intergovernmental organs of the United Nations, including the Security Council, and to strengthening the human rights pillar of the organisation. We agree to new ways to improve our response to global shocks and expanded ways of measuring human progress, so that's data collection, so that human and planetary well-being are not overlooked. So I think that's it. Is that it? Is there anything else? Oh, that's it. So that's pretty much where I wanted to stop, because that's enough. But I've written to Albanese, a couple of months ago, saying who's going to, but there's nothing in our media about him going, Australia signing up to this. There's nothing anywhere. And I've written and said, who's going to be representing us? When are you going to let the Australian people know that you're planning to go over and sign this? When are you going to let us know about this? And they, I just don't get an answer from politicians. They just don't answer me, or it takes me months to get an answer that doesn't answer the question I asked, and I just get a generic response that has got nothing to do with the actual. I ask specific questions. So I don't know what you do in this situation where you can't get clear on the most basic things, yet they talk about, this is for the whole world. Like even this UN Pact for the Future, they talked about talking to people, citizens around this. It was mostly youth, because they're getting more and more young people involved in all of this. But it was only about 200 people. So they're bringing a pact for the world and the future of the world, and they're only talking to 200 actual potentially normal people. Our government doesn't tell us. Our media doesn't. Yeah, normal. Yeah. So we're in. I just wanted to show how I've seen where we're heading and the scope of what it is, and how I think it's really concerning. And I guess I wanted to come here as well because I don't have the climate change modelling experience, and I was hoping that some people here might actually be concerned about this enough to pick up some of this, because it's coming out mid-next year. And we need to be ready for, and they are going to bring out more and more of these community resilience workshops, and unless people go along and actually, they won't talk like I have. Like I read that New South Wales Disaster Mitigation Plan. I read the one that's for council, that was on their website for the New South Wales government. It just said for council. It's 2 pages long. It doesn't mention managed retreat once in it. So I think even just going to these community workshops and actually raising some of the stuff that's in the plans would be a shock to the majority of people in the room. Just trying to find ways that we can fight back against this and push back and raise this before it's normalised, that this needs to happen this way.
Well done.
Thank you, Kate. Some of us, including me, I think, Mike, have some awareness, perhaps not the depth that you've researched recently into what's now known as Agenda 2030. It's just getting more and more complex.
Yeah.
Is it all good news? I remain comfortable. I applaud your research to date, and I do encourage you, if you can keep up the effort, try and keep on top of it, because a few of us here, including me, have got the time to maintain that level of interest in it. It's a deep subject, and it's going to affect us all.
It is.
Especially those in perhaps low-lying areas where diversity with floods and bushfires and so on are going to fall back on people and require them a mandatory move, whether they like it or not. That's scary stuff. I noticed one of your graphs there at one stage showed insurance costs, and there were two lines. The worst, of course, was showing a marked increase in insurance costs. The other one was showing a somewhat backing off, declining. That's again going to cost us all in the back pocket if these things flow through into the insurance industry. The prospect of other corporates falling in behind the Rockefellers, the corporate machines, and their corporate interests. Where does that lead us to?